So, Beardius, last time we were talking, we
Yes.
were getting in deep with the Space Marines, and we were unceremoniously cut off. We
Freeware.
fell off a
fucking
audio
freeware.
cliff. Like the...
That's what you get for being a cheap bastard.
I don't know if that was a dig directed at me, but from my perspective, I felt like Wile E. Coyote holding up a "Let Me Worry" sign and falling into a giant chasm. So, this episode, I think it's imperative that we get down some more details about the tent pole, the massive erection, if you will, holding up the circus tent that is the Warhammer 40K franchise.
Yes. The proverbial cash cow.
The cash cow. The Brahma bull, as they would say.
This is what Games Workshop worships. I mean it's their illustrious Lord Matt Ward, and we can talk about old Matty Ward at some other time. But regarding Space Marines, and I mean, maybe it harkens back to why people find Superman so appealing. I personally never did, because I always thought it was kind of cheesy that he was impervious to like everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, what is the fun of that? Like, where's the danger in it? I was always more of a Punisher guy. But, I mean, I guess a lot of people do, and I mean, it's...
Well, the Space Marines, it's interesting you draw that analogy, they are like an impervious Punisher. They're sort of a blend of those two hero and anti-hero. Well, they're not vulnerable to kryptonite. Their biggest vulnerability is themselves, right?
They are. I mean, they have several redundant... I think they might even have two hearts. I forget the exact...
So you're telling me they have superfluous organs? They have standby organs, backup?
Yeah, and it's supposed even some of them can spit acid, and they have their stomachs are reinforced so that they can eat anything.
These are humans, not space creatures.
Right, they're derived from humans, but by the time that the genetic experiments are done, they become more than human.
Wow.
They're like the next stage of evolution. They're like Captain America on steroids.
Well, I feel like we've been using the on steroids metaphor so much. It's I wish we had a better descriptor, but it is like freebasing super soldier serum directly into a toe vein.
It is, and there's several chapters. I mean, there's pretty much one for everything. Anybody could want. They have even Mongolian, Genghis Khan Space Marines. They have salamanders. They have these Roman Legionnaire. They're the actually Ultramarines, and that's a whole nother story. That's a hot topic for any serious gamer, from what I understand.
I hate to interrupt your flow, but
mm-hmm.
You've mentioned the salamanders a couple times. You've mentioned sort of the characteristics of the orcs. And just from what I've seen of some of your playthroughs, are there any lingering racial insensitivities that the casual fan should be aware of before they jump into this series? Or do you see it all as somehow consistent with the fantasy world?
I mean, there's really, from what I've noticed, there's not really many African American people in the genre. And as you've noticed in Dawn of War 2,
the Lando Calrissian effect.
Right, the Lando Calrissian, the token black guy. As you saw in Dawn of War, there was one black guy, Jonah Orion, and he ended up being killed. He was black as night, and he died.
I don't know.
He was fairly light. He was more of a chocolate
color. Yeah, that guy was the Wayne Brady of Warhammer 40K.
He was, and I mean, he stuck by Gabe pretty close. And there's not. I mean, I don't know. I don't know the racial composite the racial demographic of the United Kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
But you'd imagine, it's spanning the Milky Way galaxy. There'd probably be more Afro-Americans. But that's a whole nother topic.
I suppose I'm diverting. If you had to sum it up in 3 sentences or less, what would you say?
What, regarding racial tensions?
Or racial insensitivity. How likely is this to offend somebody, the casual?
I don't think so. I don't think it is. I mean, I think, you got to look at Games Workshop. They've been in business since the 70s. Warhammer's been around since the 80s. They've probably got a legal team on standby that by now they've hammered out any potentially racial hotspots in their lore, their setting. They even have like a little segment for the women. They have their women space marines. What are they? The Sisters of Battle. Although they don't get much love, from what I understand. But yeah, they have their women running around in their armor and what have you. But the Space Marines, I think that's where it's at. They have their own unique. From what I understand, they have a lot of codexes come out, a lot of army books come out for the Space Marines, and I guess it really you have to look at the human psyche and why these 13-year-olds maybe it's that prepubescent, like before a kid reaches his full grown. Where he's going to be at. Maybe it's, they're smaller than the other kid, and then they dream of being bigger than the other kids and just smashing face and stomping around.
Okay, so interpreting what you have to say, I would say that while Warhammer may not outright offend people from the get-go, don't expect it to not cater to its core fan base, which is white, male, obese shut-ins. Or, you have your two ends of the spectrum, the obese shut-in or the 98-pound weakling nerd.
Well, you got to watch it because, it's no different. Some of the other species or races that are present, they cater to, the fantasy fan base too. Like the in the 40K universe, it's the Dark Eldar, and they have these units of scantily clad women running around with razor sharp knives and flaying people. But they're gorgeous. They're lithe. They're wearing nothing but loincloths and maybe like a Kevlar bra.
All right.
And then there's that fantasy trope, and I'm sure feminists would have a ball with it. And honestly, why not? What practical protection does that have? How is that going to stop a bullet?
My point is appealing to their basement dwelling, prototypical nerd audience, right?
It could be, and then they could have a room in their parents' house.
Yeah. Sure. I'm not trying to be pejorative. I'm saying that makes it no less enjoyable for a 40-year-old black man like yourself.
Absolutely. But it's not for me. That's not the aspect that drives it for me. I don't love. I don't get drawn to it because of these 8-foot tall, jacked up guys who can bench, fucking 595 for 20 reps and not break a sweat. It's a combination of it. And, while that aspect in a different light is appealing to me, like I said, a guy who's, you look at it from a science fiction perspective, and a guy who, essentially look at him as a, 40th millennia Navy SEAL or Green Beret who just snaps, what would that do? We created this monster who's bigger, faster, stronger than any other person in the, human race, and we trained him to be a perfect killer. Like, what happens if his mind snaps and he just decides to go, fucking Rambo First Blood on us?
Yes, in the words of John Rambo, what happens when they draw first blood?
Or when the war doesn't go, you don't leave the war, or the war comes home with you.
These are all very topical issues for us today, and I don't want us to jackknife off the diving board into full-on homoerotic fantasy, which I know is a favorite topic of yours. Give us a few more telling points of the Space Marines. But if you can, also, can you tie it into why it would be appealing for a modern audience?
I honestly can't speak for the audience at Broad. I don't want to put words in the audience's mouth.
Why not? No, absolutely no one is listening to you.
This is probably true. This is probably just two assholes speaking to each other.
You have 3 viewers. 2 of them are me.
The audience at Broad, I mean, honestly, I think, and this is just my opinion, I think it's a wonderful setting, but I think it could use some quality authors. They do have some very excellent, but again, I would probably classify the fiction that's written there as pulp fiction. They're not at the same level as like a George R.R. Martin, or definitely not a Tolkien.
And I think you drop a fantastic point that may not be obvious to casual fans or casual observers, that this universe is a patchwork. It isn't cohesive with a single author. It's like Spider-Man. If you've ever read a Spider-Man comic book, it could have been written by one of 1,000 authors and drawn by one of 1,000 artists.
2.5.
And it's very similar. You have to compare Warhammer not to a single novel, but something of the genre, more of like a comic book.
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing. I've looked on the Games Workshop website, and anybody can submit they actually post online what they're looking for at the time. Like, they'll post, okay, like, we're looking for Space Marine fiction specifically regarding this specific chapter. And anybody can submit their work.
Wow.
You could. I could. And I mean, obviously, they're not going to...
That's scary if even you could do it.
I know. But, I'm sure they, it's a multinational company by now. I've seen Russian websites with Warhammer stuff on it, and it's branched over here. There's gaming shops all over. I've heard people talk about it from California and Canada. It's people in the, I guess what you would term the Western world, know about 40K, know about fantasy. And I'm sure even some Japanese people do. They even had an entire race in 40K created just to expand into the Japanese, the Eastern markets with their fascination of, I don't know if you've ever heard Gundam.
So like that giant robot suits.
Yep, with giant robot suits that are articulate, mobile, fast, and even with a culture that's all about, that has like a Confucian.
Rim is a fine example of that. The film Pacific Rim.
I never saw it.
Well, you're missing out on a lot of boring dialogue, punctuated by a few moments of nice action.
30 seconds.
Beardiest, I have to say, I've had a great pleasure interviewing you, and I want all the fans to look forward to next week. We're going to get more questions about hot orc talk and tips for getting into tabletop gaming. And,
sounds good. Peace. Still got 10 seconds, but...